Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to tell you guys about a documentary I saw recently. It's not like a full-on, full-length documentary. There's this channel on YouTube. It's from DW News. It's called DW Documentary, and they sort of do these like mini documentaries on all sorts of things. And they're done in different parts of the world because obviously DW is world news. And they did one that was really good on ME/CFS, which is chronic fatigue syndrome. Um, and I know that not all of us suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome, even though we have a chronic condition. But the thing I liked about this documentary, even though it does focus on chronic fatigue, it does talk about sort of like post viral or post infection syndromes. And it takes place in Germany, which I also really liked because for whatever reason, I don't know if you guys are like this, but I always seem to think that all of these illnesses are American. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I always think that these illnesses are more prevalent here in the United States because of our diet or because of climate. For example, also Lyme disease is endemic here and in Canada, so it definitely has to do a lot with our climate and our place on the planet. So I always kind of assume that these illnesses are so prevalent here in the U.S. and this documentary was actually shot mostly in I believe it's Germany. And so the people featured in the documentary are German. They do have subtitles, and then some people, I believe, actually have a translator. So it's not just subtitles. They have somebody that's actually translating in English, so that you understand what the people are saying. But it's just, it's the same experience, whether you're German or American or Chinese or whatever. The experience of this illness seems to be pretty universal and it's everywhere. They do cover long COVID a little bit in this documentary, which is why I really liked it. And which is why I'm recommending it because it's current. It's not like a documentary from like 10 years ago. It's actually very current because they do talk about long COVID. And I believe they interview one guy that has long COVID. I think a lot of chronic illness, and this is sort of, I think, the theory that we are starting to see come up in new research, that chronic illness or chronic conditions or autoimmune illnesses can be the result of an acute infection. So, it causes like maybe like an immune system dysfunction type of situation or something called mitochondrial fragmentation, which is what they are finding with chronic fatigue. And this applies to a lot of conditions, chronic Lyme or what they're now calling post Lyme disease syndrome, stiff person syndrome. I believe with multiple sclerosis, they have actually now, I believe they've linked either, I don't know if it's Epstein-Barr or another virus. They are actually starting to link it to multiple sclerosis. I believe there was a study that came out recently that found that I think like the majority of people with multiple sclerosis had this like virus in them or had like high viral titers. I don't quote me on that, but I remember hearing about that recently. Another interesting thing, and this was not covered in the documentary, but when we talk about post viral illness or things like that, I had read actually also recently, I was reading something about IBS because, my sister has IBS and I now, since I got sick, or since I've been chronically ill, I've developed a lot of IBS type symptoms, SIBO, SIFO, all of that. And there was something that said that IBS, I think in like 60% of people that have IBS, it was triggered by some type of like food poisoning. And then it became kind of a chronic or a recurring situation. And that's exactly what happened to my sister. She got really, really bad food poisoning. And it was like the worst food poisoning she has ever gotten in her life. And she said ever since then, she started having issues, a lot of issues with dairy, and just, she'll have these IBS attacks, every now and again. And of course, there's certain foods that she doesn't tolerate, like dairy, Brussels sprouts, which she used to eat a lot. She can't eat those anymore. And those are all high FODMAP foods. So I think it's very interesting that there's a lot of different conditions, and obviously food poisoning is a bacterial. I believe it's bacterial, but I think it can also be viral. I think there's multiple different um, origins for food poisoning, and so we're starting to see a lot of this evidence that if you get sick with this thing, this virus or this bacteria or whatever, yeah, you may bounce back. You may bounce back to like 85 or to 90%, but a lot of people still kind of have, some kind of lingering thing. And I think, that it does vary from person to person. We see that a lot in the Lyme community. Some people are completely homebound or bedbound. Some people are still working, even though they're fatigued and all of that. They're still working. They're still, you know, functioning, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. And I think IBS is very similar. Multiple sclerosis is very similar. It varies, and so the effects of this, I feel like there are some people out there that probably have post-viral or post-infection, a type of syndrome, but it's just very small. It's like maybe 10%. It's not that much that they don't really notice it. They'll develop an intolerance to milk, for example. And so that doesn't really count. That's not really counting in the numbers. And so, I start thinking about those things. For example, my sister would not be someone considered as having one of these post infectious type of conditions, but she did, say, after I got that food poisoning, my stomach has just been different ever since. And so all of those things, there's just so much there, that, this documentary was very intriguing to me because they explore the concept of post-viral or post-infectious illness. And I really thought that was, that could be very helpful to those of us who have chronic conditions, not just chronic fatigue or long COVID, but all of us who have not been the same since we got some kind of, weird illness 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And also I have talked about, I forget her name, but I reviewed her books on here. Her name is eluding me right now, but she wrote the books on chronic illness, how to live well with chronic illness, Tony Bernard, and she describes the same thing. She was traveling, she went abroad, I think she went to Europe, and she got I think like a cold, I don't know, she got something, some kind of a cold or a flu or something, and she said, I have never been the same since, and she suffers from chronic fatigue syndrome. And she details that in one of her books, and she tells you, this is what happened, we went on this trip, and I just was not the same after that. So, it seems like this story comes up a lot. I think for some people, they don't notice it. For example, me, I have no recollection of the tick bite. I did not have a rash. I want to say I vaguely recall a fever, but it could have been a fever from anything. So I have no recollection of that. And there were probably a lot of other people that, they might have had a cold or a flu and didn't really realize that was the trigger. So there's going to be a lot of people that are chronically ill that don't realize that it happened after some type of illness. You get to see what kind of research is being done. Obviously, the research is being done in Germany. They talk about the financial aspect of research and the amount of money it requires. They also compare other conditions. I think they compare like AIDS and multiple sclerosis or some of the other I guess, more well-known conditions, and how much money goes towards, research for those conditions, and how much goes towards ME/CFS. And yeah, it's really, that's one of the biggest problems, is that there's not enough money going into, research for that condition, which is why we still don't have answers. They talk about the theories. For example, like I said, mitochondrial fragmentation is one of the big theories, and what they're seeing in people with chronic fatigue is that their mitochondria is like fractured, and it's not whole the way that it's supposed to be, and that's what causes, that not to the inability to properly store energy. They talk about possible treatments, and um, they tried, I think, rituximab, and they talk about that clinical trial, that it did fail. But they talk about their theory behind why they tried rituximab, which is they had a theory that ME/CFS could have been an autoimmune illness, in which case rituximab, I think, I think it's a type of chemo, and that obviously is going to suppress your immune function to allow you to, your immune system to stop attacking you. And they did that clinical trial, and they didn't get what they were expecting out of it. So they're kind of revising it and seeing whether they did something wrong with that trial, or whether it just isn't, a viable option for treatment. So I also, I have talked about, my journey, and also the treatments that I've been trying. I don't have chronic fatigue. Obviously, I do have a chronic illness, that could have been caused by a tick bite. It could have been caused by something else. I do remember having, also a bad stomach infection when I was in my early 20s, and remembering that I was never the same after that. So I was having problems before then, but that stomach infection was kind of what really took me out. And I started, losing weight, and then got the really bad acne, and just things started to kind of unravel from there. There is a researcher, and I don't want to name his name. Maybe in the future I will, let you guys know who he is. And this is actually the researcher, that I got my exosome product from. And he did a lecture, when I was looking into doing exosomes or stem cells or whatever. He actually has a couple of stem cell clinics, and he also has his laboratory. Um, I think he has one in California and one in Florida. His, he's also doing clinical trials on some chronic conditions. But he did this lecture, and I was looking for more information on like exosomes and stem cells, but I ended up coming upon this lecture, and he was lecturing, I think, to doctors or healthcare practitioners. And I remember him saying, he was talking about viruses, and he was talking about, I guess what they do. And I remember him mentioning how Epstein-Barr virus is one of the most problematic viruses out there. And he was just like, that one is really a problem. Like, we need to pay attention to that one, because that's a real issue. And I remember looking at the date of that lecture. I believe it was in 2019, sometime in 2019, maybe mid to late 2019. And it was so, I don't know what the word is, serendipitous, because obviously the pandemic started the following year. And he's a researcher, and this is what he does. And he, I guess he's researched, his main area of research is stem cells and exosomes, but he did talk about Epstein-Barr virus. And I just remember him saying that. He said Epstein-Barr is just very problematic. It's a really big issue, and that's just one of the viruses that you don't want to have. And I think most of us have it, I believe. If I remember correctly. But yeah, it does seem to be the way that research is going now, is that the doctors are starting to look at viruses and infections a little bit differently and a little bit more seriously now. And I think with the pandemic and with COVID, it's going to become even, there's going to be even more attention to post viral illness or post infectious illness, because, we're going to have tons and tons of people with long COVID. And I was watching, there's a gentleman named John Campbell, I believe he's a doctor, and I've been watching his channel, and he's just recently he's been posting things about long COVID, and the numbers are not looking great. I believe there was also mentioned that the vaccine is only, I think, 15% effective in reducing the incidence of long COVID. So even if you're vaccinated, you still have a chance of developing long COVID if you get sick. So, all of these things are going to light a fire under doctors to start taking viruses much more seriously, because we're going to have a huge disabled population of people that can no longer work because they're dealing with the fallout from this virus. And so I think COVID is going to start to push, a lot of doctors and a lot of researchers in that direction so that they can find a solution to this. Oh, actually, John Campbell made he recently made the video. Today is August, I think 5th or 6th or something, and the video just came out, I think, this past week, where he details the 3 different types of post long COVID. One of them is like permanent, one of them is possibly temporary, and then there's another one. And it was very, very interesting. If you guys haven't seen his channel, it's pretty good. I think he's really good at not being alarmist, and also looking at all sides of the situation. So I would definitely check that one out on long COVID. And again, I don't think any of these, even though this documentary was about ME/CFS, I don't think there really is going to be much differentiation among a lot of these conditions in the future. It's just going to be a post-viral or post-bacterial illness, because a lot of the symptoms are very similar. There are people with Lyme disease with really severe fatigue and joint pain. There are people with MS with really severe fatigue and, body pain, SPS, a lot of body pain, joint pain, spasms, and a lot of IBS type symptoms as well, a lot of digestive problems. So I think in the future, even if they find a solution for ME/CFS, it may cross over to a lot of these other conditions and explain why these similar symptoms happen in these other conditions. So, like I said, even if you don't suffer from chronic fatigue or severe fatigue, it's worth looking at this documentary, because I think it is going to open doors to other post-viral, post-bacterial type of illnesses. So check it out. It's DW Documentary channel on YouTube. It's really good. I enjoy their other stuff. They have other documentaries too about all kinds of other things. They don't just focus on health or medicine. And it's informative and educational, and something to kind of enrich yourself, because there's a lot of garbage on YouTube. So check it out. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.